We also focus a lot on large corporates where actually we can make differences in our communities, in small companies, and this is Startup Week, so we can really start injecting this different way of thinking into smaller companies. So yeah, the large corporates are a great place to target as well, but we can also start from the ground. So it doesn't always have to be starting with the large corporates. It's trying to build this inclusive, I guess starting with awareness, then trying to build this idea of inclusivity into your business as you grow it. And the benefits that you get are you get more innovation, you get more collaboration, because you get people sharing what they share, but you also get people collaborating because they're different. Because my difference is probably going to be offset by your strength. So you get really, really good teams and they get real benefit and real innovation. So I think with the smaller companies and entrepreneurs and startups, we can really start the movement from the ground as well.
Yeah, and that's actually amazing what you said there, because I was chatting to a partner at one stage and I was going, well, I want to know how to become a partner here, as you do, 2 years into the job, and I was asking and he was saying, well, most people do the best they can do, but what you need to do is focus on doing the best that can be done. But you don't need to do that by yourself, because we have this amazing company with so many different people and so many different skill sets, and it's about building a team that can help you do the best that can be done. And that is what we do really well at PwC. It's amazing, that cross-collaboration with different departments. And it's when you open your mind to that diversity and that inclusion, and you're just going, well, these are just people, I need help, I want to see people for people, not whatever they look, not what color they are, what gender they are, any of that stuff. It's literally just people, just good people, and people that are good at their jobs. Sorry, were you going to add a bit more there? And so one thing that I would, it's such a great room here. It's very, very diverse than any other kind of event that I've attended in relation to D&I. Even last week I was at a gender pay gap panel and Sonia Lennon was running with Senator Lorraine Clifford, who are both big, huge gender pay gap activists. And it was all women, you know, and it's amazing to have this really diverse group here. And so I feel like I would love for people to make sure they can take away practical tips that they can implement within their own organizations. And while everyone here might not be a leader in their organization, do you have any tips for them of how they can help implement more effective diversity and inclusion practices within their own organization while navigating that politics and that, you know, you don't want to go in there roaring and shouting and everything, and just navigating that sensitivity around it.
Yeah, so like in the disability sector, the government offer a lot of supports. So like for a company to do disability awareness training, the government gives a 90% grant to the cost of the training up to 20,000 euros. So there's no excuse for companies to not start getting this into organizations, but as an employee, there's small things that can be done in organizations to make, for example, someone that's neurodiverse make the office more accessible to them, and that's a sensory box. So it's a little box that you spend maybe 20 or 30 euro on. You go into the Tiger shop and the small sensory cubes and that, and you might have noise cancelling earphones and different devices that if someone did have got overstimulated by the sensory environment, that they'd be able to go to a place and actually relax and calm down. It's very difficult. A lot of the newer offices have sensory pods and kind of quiet spaces, and these are very accessible for people that are neurodiverse, but they're put in there for other reasons, for everyone within the organization. It's just trying to get them to realize exactly what they're for and the benefits for people that are neurodiverse.
And I think as well, it's about starting with ourselves. So the only way we grow this is when we start with ourselves. So we can all make a difference. We can start noticing. We all have biases, so we can start noticing them. We don't need to judge them, but we can start noticing them on a daily basis and start being curious about them and sharing our experiences and not necessarily judging ourselves because we have a bias. So we can start every single day noticing when we make judgments, when we are not being as inclusive as we could be. And they're the kind of steps that we can bring into organizations, that we can bring on a very small basis. So it's not always about taking a huge step and reinventing the wheel. If we all start making small changes and start implementing these in small companies, but in our own workplaces, and including everybody in them, that's how we start rolling the ball and we get everybody into it. think from my perspective, that's what I noticed was the biggest thing. When I started changing how I was with everybody else around me, over a period of time, over 2 and 3 years, my experience with everybody changed completely. So I found so many moments of human connection just by opening up and sharing part of me, being that little bit vulnerable, giving something to someone, giving them that little bit of trust. And when you give them something, it's amazing how people open up. So we can do huge, big programs, but we can also start just with ourselves and our daily lives.
Thanks. Just going back to something that Susan had said earlier around a small organisation. I've been asked, I suppose that a lot of the time I may talk to really big organisations that are very well established strategies and budgets behind diversity and inclusion. And I think for a small organisation, like I do some work as well, and we're actually building a toolkit with we have a Centre for Family Business in DCU, and we're looking at applying this approach for SMEs. Because a lot of the proof points and case studies that are out there in the market are all the big corporates, and how do you go, and it's not really applicable if you have a team of 10 or 15 people. Like, what does diversity and inclusion mean? Be all sitting around the table and you're all saying, you think you're all the same. So what I always say is to create space in your working day to share your differences. And maybe it's not every day. It could be around, you have a brown bag lunch day and a Friday, and people just get to talk about some of the stuff that they like. But if the organisation doesn't facilitate that, it generally doesn't happen. Because people like themselves, right? And as you start to build and grow your companies, and I've seen this, where organisations, some of the organisations I would talk to have created huge inside sales floors where there's 1,500 people have all come on board in the last 12 months, and nobody talks to anybody. Everybody's staying in all their little pockets. Because of that, because we're human, we like people like ourselves. So in a small organisation, knowing that you're going to scale it and you're going to grow it, I would say focus on inclusion. So you recognise the diversity, where people are from, you get that, but it's trying to encourage those inclusive conversations around and creating the space for people to bring their whole selves to work. I know we've all heard that, but thinking about that, where people get a chance to talk about showing the pictures of their kids, or talking about when they went surfing on the weekend, or just creating space for real life conversations for people to talk about themselves as humans. And if you start doing that when you're in a company of 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 people, you'll start to get a sense of the diversity. Even if you're all, everybody has different lives, different experience. And what you're doing is, like I always describe the journey through, because most organisations go out and do unconscious bias training, right? And they hop in and hop out, and then everybody's back to their day job, and it's a waste of money, right? But what I think we should be doing is we need to start focusing on the stereotypes. How did we end up with those biases? It's the blue baby, pink baby, right? And all the other stuff that we were primed with as we throughout our lives, right? And then we move into privilege. And privilege is where we like people like themselves. So my privilege, white woman, Irish, English is my first language, educated, they're all my privileges, and I recognise that. And in recognising and they may not be the norm in Ireland, by the way, and the minority, but they are the norm in Ireland, and the privileged group in Ireland is the white, Irish, middle-aged, married, white male. And if you're not straight, if you're not part of that group for whatever one of any of those reasons, you're in that group. Like I remember hearing a man on stage, and this is the first time I recognised this. He was a senior leader in Accenture, and he was on stage at a CEO conference, and he said, he made just a little comment that I picked up on, where he was saying he wasn't part of the in-group because he's American. So he felt like he wasn't part of his group, and I was thinking, holy shit, look at him now, and here he is up on stage, and he's part of this senior leadership, and he feels like he's out. How is he out? Because he's not in the privilege. So for what you create, when you create that space in your companies now, when they're this size, when you create the space for people to bring themselves and be human and talk about the human experience, you break down the barriers of that privilege, right? And one of the other things, and I'll finish on this, I was explaining this story earlier, I was asked to go in to PwC and talk about cultural diversity, right? And I was thinking, Jesus, what do I know about cultural diversity, but I'll give it a go anyway. So I went in, hopefully I did a great presentation. Yeah. But in putting that together, one of the things that I realised, which I'd never realised that I can be an ally for people, for somebody else. I never thought about that because I'm so busy with my head down, D&I, living in my own bubble, my own privilege. I never thought that I could be a voice and be an advocate, and that I could be, for somebody maybe who is struggling, or maybe somebody who doesn't have the same privilege as I have, that I can be aware of that, recognize my privilege, recognize that unfortunately they're struggling because they don't have my privilege right now in this moment, and be the ally and be the voice. And that's what you create when you start those conversations at the team of 10 and 15, because it's human connection there, isn't it? Yeah? And then we become allies for each other. And nobody cares where you're from, or what your privilege is, or what school you went to, or whether you came from one parent, two parent. It doesn't matter, because what you've done now is create a space for humans. But it's creating a space, because if you don't put that time in, and it's not part of what you're doing on a weekly basis, it's not going to happen naturally. So inclusive, truly inclusive leadership are the people and the leaders of the organisation that create the space for that to happen. And inclusive leadership is actually an academic concept. If you want to have a look up, it's the latest trend. You mentioned trends earlier. It is the latest trend in leadership is inclusive leadership. And there's a list of characteristics around inclusive leadership. And I think we've all mentioned them this evening around being vulnerable is one of them, right? So creating the space and being vulnerable, and don't be always thinking you're the person at the top who has to have all the answers, and because you're encouraging other people to open up then by you opening up.
I think the idea of non-judgment is very important. So if you're giving people a safe space, if they have biases, it's for them to recognize them and understand them, not to say you shouldn't have that, that's wrong, because straight away then people start to feel, oh no, I shouldn't have that, that's wrong, I can't talk about it. So it's about letting people explore what biases they have, because we all came from different backgrounds, we all grew up, whether it's privilege, whatever way we grew up with different biases. And it doesn't necessarily mean that our intention is bad. Usually it's just fear. So there's nothing badly intentional behind our behaviour necessarily. We might just be acting out of fear. So by creating a safe environment, you're letting people share those experiences, because the only way you get them out in the open is to share. And if you don't feel safe, then you won't share. And then the next person won't share, and the next person won't share. And what you might find when people start sharing is that these people with the privilege that we think feel like they fit in, maybe they don't fit in, because maybe they're creative, maybe they're intuitive, maybe they're fears, maybe they're a bit different, and they're in an industry that doesn't accept that. So they have put themselves into a box that the industry wants them to be in. So just because they look like they fit in, and they look like they're in that in group, doesn't necessarily mean like they do. So I just think start the conversations, and more people start to get involved in diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, when I talk about it in PwC, it's really interesting, because I always go back to like the kid who doesn't play rugby. Like, that kid is not going to fit into the rugby testosterone group, you know, and this is what inclusion is about. It doesn't matter if it's like black, white, disability, all of these other things. It's just about creating an environment where everyone feels okay to be themselves, regardless of the attributes of their personality. And just, you were speaking there about privilege as well, and it's this thing that's kind of turned into a dirty word around like white privilege, and it's, for some people, they feel, you know, it's something that's wrong, but it's something that is really important for us as humans to recognize. Like, I recognize my privilege as a black woman, that I'm able to sit up here. I recognize the privilege that I have, that I get to just pop over to my managing partner and have a conversation with him. I recognize the privilege that I have with the platform that I have, that I'm able to do these things. And that's why I try to use my privilege to be an ally to people who don't feel they have a voice and don't feel that they can do that. And so don't underestimate your ability to do that for the people around you. It's so powerful when you do that for the people around you, and it's meant. Listen, I would be where I am today if it wasn't for different allies seeing me for me along my journey. And anyone who knows my story will think it's hilarious that I'm calling myself privileged, because I've had such a disadvantaged upbringing, but I do recognize my privilege. I recognize the privilege that I have that I work in an accounting firm. I recognize the privilege that I have in education. I recognize the privilege that my son goes to a private school, and that's insane for someone who's a teen mom. I recognize those things, and I try to give back. And it's just about recognizing those things about yourself and trying to help other people. Next question. So it was a really funny thing that you said there, Sandra, about call your granny. So this thing that I know about with some of my friends is some of my friends who are gay, it's like when you go home if you're going to Granny's house on a Sunday for Sunday dinner, you're straight, and you start talking about your imaginary girlfriend that you have, and I think that's absolutely insane. It's like their parents have just gone, listen, don't upset her, just pretend and just get on with it. And do you think that there's an issue there with the generation gap when it comes to diversity and inclusion? Because I feel like millennials are very into diversity and inclusion, and millennial leaders also, I feel, in my experience, our young companies generally are pretty into having effective diversity and inclusion policies. So do you think that there's a generational gap here in relation to D&I that we need to try and figure out how to?
Yeah, it's a huge gap, and it comes down to empathy from what I've experienced, and a lack of empathy within a certain generation. And it's a certain male generation as well that just have a total lack of empathy when it comes to someone that might be struggling within their workplace. And unfortunately, that age gap are running a lot of the companies that we're seeing trying to get these initiatives going. And it's stereotypes that were created while they were young. So like autism 30, 40 years ago there, even the best case of autism could be assigned to residential care, and they weren't left to progress through school. Dyslexia was treated horrendously through the secondary or primary and secondary schools. So this is what them leaders would have grown up with. And it's tough to try and change that mindset and change that empathy and understanding. And sometimes it's changed when it hits home whereby maybe their grandson or daughter is diagnosed with something. So the son or daughter, or grandson or granddaughter is diagnosed with autism. And then they start to understand it. Then the empathy comes because they're thinking about what happens in 18 years' time when that person or that young person is going into the workplace. And there's a fear around that. And that inspires them to make an impact. And I think that's the biggest thing we need to create around this diverse inclusion, is that everyone can create an impact within their organization. It doesn't matter whether you're a cashier within an organization, you're the one that can push the leaders within the organization to do something. Because the power of our employees coming together and forcing management to make change. And we saw that recently with Google, where they made a stand in Dublin, took an hour out of their work and made a change in terms of nationwide, international coverage. This was something that was trendy on Twitter, and it was something that was just thought of, and it was implemented. It was something very simple, but it was a very powerful message for the leaders within Google to actually start thinking about how they're actually going to make a change within this. And it's not going to be something that's solved within a day or a week or a year. It's something that has to be very agile, where they're coming up with something and it might have to be changed. You're not going to get this perfect from day one. And that's what we always say with companies. It's the start is sometimes the hardest part, and then it's actually looking back at the results from that start and how you can actually implement it further. And I think the start is what is the fear, and especially with disability and every other sector of diversity and inclusion, it's the start.
And I think as well, it's valuing people at different life stages. So that age diversity is also a hugely prevalent issue at the moment, because our workforce is getting older. So I guess by getting people to buy into the diversity and inclusion as they age, they buy into the movement. And by recognising that impacts them as well, that is potentially a way that you find a connection with them, because they can find some way to identify with it. Because I guess at the moment for them, yeah, they grew up in, and a lot of the time these biases, they're just stereotypes they grew up with. So again, the intention is not necessarily negative, but they're coming from the perspective of this is bias that I have, and no one is encouraging them or forcing them to challenge it. So as this generation gets older, they're going to recognise bias in the workplace. So by including them, by saying, hang on a second, diversity and inclusion is also valuing everyone at their life stages, then you get them to buy into the whole movement. So I think it's tapping into how diversity and inclusion includes everyone. So because everyone works, what's in it for me? What's the point in me bothering on this age? Why would I get involved? Well, actually, as you grow through the workforce, as you get older, this age diversity is going to really impact you. So how can we buy into a movement that you're going to contribute to? So I think it's just finding a way to include everyone in it.
Yeah, I think age or generational diversity is an interesting one, and I think I suppose I do some talks sometimes around millennials in the workplace and the challenges and opportunities that brings. I think we're in unprecedented times, right, where we have 5 generations in the workforce at any one time. So you think about that, the Gen Zs are starting to come in now, and people are retiring later. We've never ever had that. So 5 generations in the workplace. So that brings challenges, but it also brings opportunities then as well. So I have a couple of stories that just explain how things go terribly wrong. One, I remember I was working with one of the banks and they were telling me about their graduate recruitment program, and they sent this young man out as part of the program out to meet the manager of the branch now that he was going to be working for on this particular rotation. And he got his new suit, new shirt, his perfect brown shoes, all polished up and everything ready to go. And he walks in the door and the manager goes, "Where's your tie? What are you doing wearing brown shoes into work?" You know, so here's the young lad after doing his best, right, new shirt, all that, all ready to go into work. And the manager was thinking that this is a sign of disrespect. You don't wear brown shoes with a suit, and you don't come into work without a tie. So it's the organisation. Like, nobody wants to be disrespectful in that situation. The young man's highly offended, and the manager was obviously not very happy with the young lad turning up for work. But that's the organisation has a responsibility to make sure that as people, you know, move through the organisation throughout their life, that they have respect and tolerance is the key thing there, right? And understanding for each other. And one of the things that we've seen, and I suppose has been proven to work, is reverse mentoring. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. And you have young people coming into the organisation, and that you make sure that you're connecting them with more established members and different levels within the organisation, so that people start to get a sense of what it's like for the other generation. Because this is the fact, 5 generations in the workplace, this isn't going away, but the organisation have a responsibility to help with raising awareness around that. And the D&I, your point about getting involved with D&I groups, fantastic. That's the great thing to do. So one of generational diversity is probably on very few organisations kind of employee resource groups, but we're starting to see a little bit more of it. So I think it's important that there is, particularly, no matter what type of D&I team, is that one of the filters that you might have is generational diversity. So not just gender diversity, not just cultural, that you make sure that you're engaging the different generations within your workforce in those conversations. I was going to tell you another story. What was the other one I was going to tell you? Can't remember it now. It might come back to me.
Be triggered by the next question.
Yeah, I suppose that millennials, actually, I've just said, they say
waiting for our time to shine.
One of the great paradoxes they say about millennials, like there are many, like if we think about the times that millennials, which are most of you in the room now, the times that millennials grew up in, and I have 4 nieces that are all millennials, but it's very uncertain times, a very uncertain world, and it has created almost like an anxiety and a powerlessness. But what it has created is a movement and tolerance for each other and respect for each other that maybe wasn't there so much because there's less of an influence from church and government and state and all the other things, you know. So because millennials are left in this kind of space that they need to work in and to try and figure things out as a group, a collective. And I remember when I was working in tech companies, I remember seeing one in particular when I was working in O2, one person left the inside sales team, and within 10 months there was about 8, 10, 15 of them, they were all gone. So when one goes, because work is part of the social environment, so when one went, they brought the whole lot with them. Yeah? And this is a phenomenon that we start to see, and this is why diversity and inclusion is so important for organisations, because millennials will go in, you might have a nice shiny diversity and inclusion strategy, but if you don't live it, they're gone. And when they go, then they bring 4 or 5 or 6 or however many people with them. But just to give you an idea of the different generations, the last thing I'll say, right, if we think about the traditional journey of our lives, right, and particularly for the other generations, which I am part of, generally the journey of our lives is learn, earn, return. Okay, so you go to school, if you're lucky enough to get 3rd level and you were influenced by your parents, which I wasn't, by the way. If you were, you went to 3rd level education. Then you earn. So you go into work, you buy your house, you buy your car, and you save enough money if you're lucky to get on a couple of holidays a year, if that's your life. And then when you retire, you find some way of giving back. That's not the case for millennials. Millennials want to learn, earn, and return. It's a continuous cycle throughout their whole lives. So they want continuous learning, and they need those opportunities in the workplace. And they want to earn enough money to do them now. Why would you bother? Buy a car, get a car loan, you must be joking. Why would I bother do that? I can get a leap car. You know, there's just, I have 2 nieces who don't even have a driver's license. I couldn't wait. I was hopping in a car when I was 16. But anyway, just that freedom and the cycle is around flexibility around what I want to do with my life now. And if that is a secondment to go off and live in Australia or do something else, then I want the organisation to be able to support me in doing that. And return, absolutely critically important for a millennial. I want to feel like I contribute. I want to feel like that my organisation supports me in whatever cause that I'm interested in, but give me the opportunity to contribute and give back to society. So even, that's what I talk to managers and different generations in the workplace. That's the penny dropped for a lot of people, because then they go, now I understand I'm having difficult one-to-ones. You know, so it's just the organisation has a responsibility to bring everyone in the organisation along that journey and the differences between the generations.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and that reverse mentoring, it's really interesting because I have a couple mentors that I've gone to and gone, will you please be my mentor? And they're like, great, can you actually mentor me too? Because I don't know what the hell's going on, sorry for the cursing, with your generation. And they're people who are in very serious, very senior roles, but they're trying to understand millennials being like, you know, I need my compassion dog or something here for my anxiety. And they're going, what the hell is wrong with these people? And you know, it's so important, and I definitely, sorry, I keep looking at my phone, that's because my questions are written there, I'm not insanely rude. But I think it's a really amazing thing, especially with Gen Z. I actually think that they're doing it better than us millennials, to be honest. Gen Z are amazing.